Welcome back, Elite. This is your host, Michael Broadbent. This is episode 3 of the Elite 16 podcast reboot. With us today, we have two guests. One you're familiar with, one you're a little less familiar with. Let them introduce themselves now.
What's up, guys? This is Nick Mazzetti of the Eastern Legends, Commissioner of the American East. What's up?
This is Mike Planko, owner of Spin on Jitneys and owner of a 2-0 record against Nick Mazzetti last season.
Ooh, damn. It's coming out swinging. I like it.
I'm sure that 2-0 record has helped you get in the playoffs these past couple years, right?
Yes, sir. You know it.
I don't think it has.
Guys, I think I'd be.
I don't know what.
Last year too. It's okay.
I don't know what you're talking about, man. I'm back-to-back champ.
I don't know about that.
So today, first thing we're gonna go through is just some recent NFL news, near and dear to some of our hearts in the league. One Josh Gordon got in a little more trouble today. I believe he is rumored to have failed another drug test on a year-long suspension. And Nick, you want to talk about this bright young man's future right now?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'm probably one of the most qualified to talk about it, seeing as how I've had many shares of Justin Blackmon go awry to the same issue. So I'm very familiar. But basically, the news broke today that Josh Gordon was, I think it was about a month ago, he failed a drug test, and they found traces of marijuana and a thinning agent or whatever to try to dilute the sample. So it's not looking good for him, and right now he's shacked up with Johnny Manziel. So I really don't know where his head's at, but I would be shocked if he played football anytime soon.
Yeah, I think Johnny got all black people mixed up and thought he was living with Von Miller, and it was actually Josh Gordon.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was like an actual rumor that came out for some reason, so Johnny Manziel was bombarded by TMZ at some point, and they asked him what's new, and he said that he's bunking with Von Miller right now, and they're trying to get their life together. And then Von Miller's PR team was like, "What the hell you mean get our life together? I'm just one of these things. I don't need to get my life together." But yeah, I mean, I would say
Von Miller is pretty much the polar opposite of Johnny Manziel.
Yeah, really the only things I have similar is that they went to Texas A&M.
Yeah, and also I think Coach Kubiak was also a Texas A&M alma mater, so there were connections there. I think everyone was trying to hope that he could reclaim himself there, but I don't really think it's going to happen. But it was funny because today I was talking to Johnny Mack and just kind of shooting the breeze, just kind of trying to get a pulse on what he's trying to do and all that. And he mentioned that he was going to trade for Josh Gordon. And I told him, I was like, listen, if you ever take my advice on anything, do not trade for Josh Gordon. And I'm completely honest, 2 hours later, this news broke that Josh Gordon popped another drug test, and it's like, my God, just, people look at that 1,600-yard season, and they just keep on wishing it back to be what it used to be, and it's never going to happen. You're never going to get that from him again. It's gone. Just say goodbye and move on. There's plenty of good wide receivers out there. Stop trying to make Josh Gordon happen. It's not going to happen. Yeah,
I agree. He's just getting in his own way too much. I remember we were going to do that Dynasty Joker site, and the first article I had written up, we just didn't publish, was why you should just be selling Josh Gordon. And no lie, 2 weeks later he gets hit with that year-long suspension, and it's one of those things where it would have made you look like a genius had you put it out there right before it broke, but it's whatever.
I would say the one thing I remember from that article that you wrote that I found was interesting, and it was a different take on Josh Gordon than you normally hear. Normally, when you hear Josh Gordon, you think of the off-the-field issues, but you actually, I believe, zoned in on Josh Gordon's performance in the fourth quarter and how the majority of his stats were fourth quarter garbage yardage, and that would not be conducive to actually projecting long-term success over a season when things aren't always in the tank. He was a guy that really benefited from playing on a team that was playing catch-up the whole year.
Yeah, I think specifically in his 1,600-yard season. I think 34% of all of his yards and something like 40% of all of his touchdowns came in the fourth quarter. And I think the average of top 10 receivers was something like 25 and 25. So, like it broke out to be like pretty consistently like evenly spread when you look at all the top 10, but his was just wildly skewed. But yeah, he's in general just a piece of shit. So on to the next topic. On to another piece of shit. RG3 landed in the land of poop that Josh Gordon has been evicted from in Cleveland. Mike, you want to talk a little bit about what you think about RG3 in Cleveland?
Well, honestly, I've actually always liked RG3. For some strange reason, I think he's a good football player, and I sort of think he can't get out of his own way and can't stay healthy. But I think he's got the talent, and I think he deserves another shot. And I think not saying he's going to do well in Cleveland because they're a train wreck, but at least he landed on a team that's willing to give him a shot. And I wouldn't mind seeing him succeed there.
Yeah, RG3 is one of those guys that I've done a complete 180 on. I remember back to our inaugural draft, I mean, if I didn't get Andrew Luck, RG3 was pretty close up there on my list. The one thing that I remember I liked about RG3 a lot when I scouted him was that he came from a military family, so I thought that he was good. If anything, he was going to have it between the ears, and he was going to stay disciplined, and he was going to stay humble and all that. And you really just kind of saw RG3 by the RG3 hype, it felt like. And it seemed like he got too much success too early, and then he became too overconfident in his athletic ability instead of putting time in the film room and preparing for games. And then once that athletic ability was taken away from him with the injury, you saw him really struggle, and he struggled to trust his his knee or ankle, whatever it was. So I don't know. I mean, if there was a place for him to kind of just like set him free and see what he can do, Cleveland is the spot. But I'm not bullish by any means. And if I was Cleveland, I'd still draft a quarterback at number 2.
Yeah, I agree with you. A couple things. If he was going to go anywhere and play under any offensive mind, I think Hugh Jackson's probably in the top 2 or 3 to salvage the most value out of an offensive player. Another thing with him was he had a few catastrophic knee injuries in college. I know he had one really bad ACL tear, and I think he tore his ACL and MCL as a redshirt freshman at Baylor. He's always been very slight and very slender build, and he never really knew how to avoid contact either. And you could kind of get away with that when you're younger, but when you get to the NFL, everybody's just a huge like brick shit house, and they're just going to destroy you if you give yourself the opportunity to get destroyed. And if you look at some of the mobile quarterbacks that have had long-term success in the NFL, they're guys who are willing to not get that extra yard or two and go out of bounds or slide. Like look at Russell Wilson, for example. You have guys who have baseball experience, have the pocket awareness not to get those big hits put on you. Russell Wilson is probably the quintessential guy in terms of somebody who doesn't take that big hit ever. And I honestly can't remember a single time when Russell Wilson's ever taken a big hit in his entire time in the NFL. And that's why, in my opinion, he's going to last a while. But a guy like RG3, he's the best when he can run, but he doesn't know how to run the ball and not get hurt.
This thing about RG3 is kind of funny because it reminds me a little bit of Mike Vick in a certain way. Because if you remember, I think there was a time, I think like 2 years ago or whatever, where they actually had to teach RG3 to slide.
Yep.
Like he didn't know how to slide, like he's never done it or whatever. They had to teach him how to do it. And it reminds me of when Chip Kelly had to teach Mike Vick how to hold a football or something like that. Or it was either Chip Kelly or Andy Reid, I forget. But he was like, yeah, no one ever taught me how to hold a football or something.
Yeah, it's just really strange when these guys don't know how to do really easy athletic maneuvers, and yet they're so world-class in other ways. They're almost like they have like an Asperger's for certain athletic traits. I don't know.
But for sliding, really, I think to some extent you can get away with being more physical when you're a larger player. like Cam Newton does. But if you look at Andrew Luck and Cam Newton, although they may have a slightly different pigment, they're athletically extremely similar. And they both play with a lot of toughness. And you saw Andrew Luck get chewed out by his coach, Chuck Pagano, this year because he said, my quarterback needs to stop playing like a fucking linebacker.
Yep.
Because even a guy as big as Luck can get hurt taking those shots. So I really hope that Cam Newton starts to develop more as a pocket passer and stop being reliant so much on his running ability. And I hope Andrew Luck does the same. And if RG3 is going to have sustained success in this league, he's going to have to do the same as those guys.
I agree. Moving from one quarterback situation to another, let's talk about the New York Jets quarterback situation. Right now, they still haven't signed Ryan Fitzpatrick, and I assume the NFL is just kind of waiting for that first domino to fall, whether it be a trade or whether it be the draft. Mike, what do you think about the Jets quarterback situation right now?
Mike, that's you.
I think Fitzpatrick played well for them last year. Am I on a fucking huge delay here? I don't know what's happening, but
I don't know. You're kind of cutting out,
but yeah, I mean, I think
it's coming through a little bit.
Yeah, I think they're offering him a fair amount of money, and I think. Can you hear me?
You're kind of cutting out. Try it again.
Check, testing, 1, 2.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I think they're offering Fitzpatrick a good amount of money, and they have a decent team, and I think he puts them in the best position to win compared to what they have right now, for sure, because we know Geno ain't the answer. So I think they should pony up and pay him until they find the eventual heir to the throne, I guess, and try to compete.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is a very interesting phenomenon to observe because you don't really see many quarterbacks rise to starter because the starting quarterback got sucker punched in the jaw by a teammate in the locker room, and for Ryan Fitzpatrick to take that opportunity that was that was laid before him and really parlay into an outstanding season. He's been one of those guys that everyone seems to want to pigeonhole into this like holdover quarterback mold that the Giants were trying to do with Kurt Warner when they drafted Eli Manning, and it seems like he's just kind of outplaying what everyone's expecting of him, and I really don't see any reason why he shouldn't get paid like a starting quarterback and seen as one. He's got maybe five years of playing time ahead of him, and you see what he can do when he has weapons in Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. For me, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you have enough money to pay him, just pay the guy. And I mean, they were really close to the playoffs this year, so I really wouldn't mess with that.
Yeah, especially for a team that's so focused on winning now with the Jets.
Yeah.
I don't see what the holdup is there. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick might be the most underrated quarterback in the NFL. All he does is produce offensively in terms of, if you look at his historic touchdown to interception ratio, he's almost always positive, even when he's playing for the Texans, he's playing for the Titans, playing for the Jets, who haven't had a potent air attack probably since Brett Favre was there, and even that was kind of a lost season. But I agree, they need to pay the guy. They'll probably be a fringe playoff team again with him. Without him, they're definitely not making the playoffs. With a rookie or Geno or Bryce Petty, no chance. But segueing into more quarterback conversation, a lot of rumors have been swirling the last few weeks about a possible Denver-San Francisco hookup, but nothing seems to have come to fruition as of right now. Nick, what's your feelings on that situation?
Yeah, so this has been a very interesting trade to follow, the negotiations of it. I know when San Fran first opened up, they were open to trading Colin Kaepernick. They were asking for, I believe, a second-round pick. And it's interesting how that initial posturing eventually develops into they're only looking for a fourth now, and I believe they're trying to get Denver is trying to get San Francisco to even stay on the hook for some of his contract. Um, Apparently, like Denver has a very specific number they want him at, and they're not willing to trade. And both teams have been playing hardball with each other. I know a lot of people thought that San Fran was going to move him before his contract became guaranteed for the year. Um, but I think they've stuck with him just so that they could kind of throw that out as leverage to be used against them in trade negotiations. Really, it's a very interesting thing to be arguing over. I remember back a couple years ago, we were talking about RG3 and Colin Kaepernick as the new mold of the NFL quarterback, and this is going to be a paradigm shift. And here we are a couple years later, and both these guys are trying to get jobs. So it's just very interesting how far the mighty have fallen. But Kaepernick looked broke. He looked broke last year. He looked broke the year before. I followed him last year pretty closely because I invested in him. And I remember the one passing game he had that I was impressed with. I believe the ball only traveled like 3 yards in the air on a shuffle pass, and then was taken like 70 yards downfield on a run after catch. He really just he couldn't do anything himself, and the whole team suffered because of it.
What do you think, Mike? What do you think, Planko?
Yeah, I personally think San Fran is one of the worst teams in the league right now. Really don't like anything that's going on there. I've never really liked Kaepernick. He's got a rocket arm, but to me, I've just never seen the accuracy. I just don't think he hits guys where they need to be hit. They've only got a couple good guys over there to be excited about in San Francisco. And I don't even know if going to Denver, I guess that would be better for Kaepernick, but I'm just not a fan, and no matter where he goes, I just don't see him being a high-quality starter, personally.
Yeah, San Francisco is quickly becoming like the new Cleveland Browns in terms of dysfunction with all the off-the-field issues they've been having, and also the seemingly destructive mentality they have in upper management. They think they're smarter than they are, and they're going nowhere real fast. But to move on to the last piece of news / possible news, there's been a lot of rumors also swirling about the Eagles possibly moving up to number 1 and taking quarterback, most notably Carson Wentz. Although it probably would cost a lot. Mike, what do you think about the Eagles possibly moving up to number 1 and snagging the quarterback of the future?
Sorry, I'm on a delay here, so every time you ask me a question, you probably ask me twice before I start answering.
That's cool.
But I actually haven't heard much about that, to be honest with you. I guess it makes some sense, although they've went out and signed a couple of quarterbacks and spent a decent amount of money. I don't know that I'm sold on either of those guys as the career signal caller for the Eagles over there, who have a pretty good offense otherwise. But I'm also not sure that it makes a whole lot of sense for them to pretty much sell the farm to move up to get a young guy when they have 2 quarterbacks worth a decent amount of money already on their roster.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's a pretty fair opinion to have. But I know Broadbent has been a guy that's been hyping up Carson Wentz for a while, and there was a good deal of time where I was fighting him on it because I just didn't have a level of exposure on him. But right now, Carson Wentz is this guy fresh out of North Dakota State,
Yep.
playing against the scrappiest of the scrap competition. It's kind of a bloodbath there, but. Yeah, basically, the one thing about Carson Wentz that I find interesting is that it felt like the comparisons to Andrew Luck were kind of lazy because it's big, athletic quarterback. But the more I look into it, the more that they're kind of there. You're talking about an academic All-American, a guy who was in charge of more at the line of scrimmage, even against his crappy competition, than the premier quarterbacks coming out in this draft. I mean, he was the undisputed leader of a team, and all he did was win. And when scouts look at a guy, they try to look at him in a vacuum. So really, they don't look at him necessarily how he did against competition. They do like how did he perform against physics? You know, like how did his feet look? How did the ball come out of his hand? Where was the release point? That kind of stuff. So he's a guy that I've been kind of falling in love with, and the closer that I follow, it sounds like the Eagles are falling in love with him too. And I've been kind of kicking around this kind of dream scenario, where the Eagles trade Fletcher Cox and the 8th pick. And don't get me wrong, I love Fletcher Cox. He's probably my favorite player on the team. But I see Muhammad Wilkerson is there in the New York Jets, and I know they're dying to get rid of him because they drafted Leonard Williams last year, and they're on the hook right now for a $15 million tag on Wilkerson this year, with 1 year left on his contract, so they'd have to re-up. And I don't know if they want to pay that kind of money all across their entire defensive line when they've got like Sheldon Richardson there too. So I could see them use Cox to move up, take a quarterback, and then move something else, to get Wilkerson and shore up what they gave up to get him. That would be my dream scenario. But.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be all for it. It's a little redundant given that they also signed Chase Daniel. I never really got that signing. I knew he's a big Doug Peterson guy, but to pay a backup quarterback $7 million a year over 3 years, who has thrown like 13, however many passes he's thrown in the NFL, he's had like one game he's played in. Wasn't a big fan of that, but it's a quarterback-driven league. You got to get the guy that you can really rely on, get you some wins long term. Carson Wentz, I feel like, is that guy in this draft. He might not be as polished as Jared Goff, but comes from a program that's won 5 straight national titles. He was the quarterback for 2 of those. All he's done, when you have a guy who's playing at a lower level, what you really want to see is dominance when he's in the game and when he's actually commanding an offense, especially. And he's really looked dominant in his 2 years as a starter. He broke his wrist this year, and he came back off of like 6 or 8 weeks being cold and just dominated Jacksonville State in the national championship game. He really does remind me of a white Cam Newton with the way he plays. He's not even close to the athlete, but his playing style is very, very similar. He's a big-bodied guy, 6'6". He dominated the Senior Bowl practices. A lot of people were talking about how the ball just looked different coming out of his hand than any other quarterbacks there. He really impressed all the scouts. He's a guy that if you went to a big-name school, he'd be the unanimous number 1 pick. But to me, he checks all the boxes. He's got the frame to last. He kind of has the body of maybe a Ben Roethlisberger. I wouldn't say he plays like Ben, though, but he's got a very similar thick build, and he just seems like he's a guy who could hold up in bad weather areas. I think that's the main reason why rumors of the Browns preferring him over Goff have been persisting for so long. But yeah, I think we got basically all of the news we wanted to cover. The next segment we wanted to go into is discussing some of the top prospects in this upcoming rookie draft. And in my opinion, there's a clear top 5, at least in terms of the dynasty community. The first guy is pretty much the unanimous number 1, and that seems to have built steam over the last few months, unlike any of the other top guys. That guy's Ezekiel Elliott. To me, he's the top number 1, easy top number 1 guy in this draft. Mike, what do you think about Ezekiel Elliott and his NFL prospects?
I like Elliott a lot, and I think given the right landing place, he could pretty much be a top-flight running back. I think he's put up good numbers. He's got good size. He played for a big-name program, and he's played the best of the best. I think that says a lot. The one thing I don't like is that they run out of the shotgun too much. I'm never a fan of that for anybody, but just watching some of his tape and the way he's able to operate in the open field and all, I think he'll actually translate quite well to the NFL, especially if he goes to the right team.
Yeah, to pick up on that, I think Ezekiel Elliott is about as good of a as good of a running back prospect that's come out in some time. I think if Todd Gurley wasn't hurt coming into the draft last year, it would have been Gurley, but he did have that big question mark. Elliott really doesn't carry any question marks for me. The number one thing that prevents rookie running backs from seeing the field is pass protection. And that's generally where their liability coming out of college because they don't have much experience doing it. They're really just the guy that just runs the ball every play. But Ezekiel Elliott is as good of a pass protecting running back that I've ever seen come out. I think he graded out perfectly or nearly perfectly all of last season. And when you talk about a guy with so many other strengths to his game to be so solid in that aspect, really just well rounds him up. Generally, pass protection is something that you see out of a guy that struggles everywhere else. And so it's interesting to see that he carries everything so well and he catches the ball naturally. I think he's going to go in the top 10, and it'll be exciting to see where he goes.
Yeah, I think he's a guy, if the Eagles can't find the right pieces to trade up to number 1, I could see them easily taking him at number 8, especially getting rid of DeMarco Murray. They have a huge hole at running back long term. They got Ryan Matthews still. They still have Darren Sproles, but they really don't have that guy that they can really have took the rock for them going into the future. His 3-game stretch in the 2014 season was just incredible.
Crazy.
From the Big Ten championship through the CFB playoffs, it was just amazing. He had something like 550 yards over those 3 games against Wisconsin, Alabama, and Oregon. It's just incredible. He carried them to a national championship. Without him, Cardale Jones isn't the guy that everybody hypes him up to be because he didn't have the guy to back him up in every situation. The next guy we have on this list is a guy who seems to have just been eaten alive by haters like me over the pre-draft process, and the guy's name is Laquan Treadwell. My main criticism of him, when you watch him on tape, he just doesn't have that burst, that quick twitch, that athleticism you really want out of a wide receiver 1. To his credit, he does catch pretty much everything, and he is able to really out-muscle guys when he's being covered by cornerbacks. But when you get to the NFL, you're going to have bigger guys, faster guys, guys who could jump higher. And I see that window of his being able to really be physical close significantly because the guys who he's going to be going up against have that much more athleticism than he faced in college, even though he was in the SEC. Nick, what do you think about Laquan Treadwell? Give me your breakdown of him.
Sure. So Treadwell is a guy who I've been high on for a while, even before he broke his ankle against Auburn in 2014. He's been the guy, like the next great wide receiver that's coming out, and then and to be honest, I think he looked better before the injury. I think he looked more explosive. It seemed like he came back stronger later in the year in 2015 as he's gotten more confidence in that leg. But I'll say that your concerns are real. I mean, Laquan Treadwell is a guy that I thought was the next Dez Bryant, and I've come to terms with him not being. I mean, they share similar playing styles, but he doesn't have that explosiveness that Dez Bryant has. But I'll say that he's more physically aggressive than Dez Bryant, in my opinion. I think he's the most physically aggressive wide receiver I've ever seen. He really reminds me a lot of Anquan Bolden. Athletically, they're very similar. Bolden was a guy that was going to be the first wide receiver taken in that Andre Johnson draft until he completely bombed the combine, and no one wanted to touch him until day 2. But I think Treadwell, he benefits from being extremely young. He's only 20 at this point. He turns 21 before the season. I think he's going to get even further removed from injury. He's never going to be one of those explosive lid lifters, but he's the guy that's going to do the dirty work inside. He's going to use his body well to shield off defenders. And, maybe I'm not going to get the next OBJ if I take him at number 2, but I feel really good about getting a guy who's going to be a productive receiver in the league for a very long time.
What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I do like Treadwell. I think he's got good size. He's had good production. I know that speed is a concern and being able to get separation at an NFL level. And from what I've seen of him in college, I actually think he does get some pretty good separation. I've seen him be underthrown when he has separation quite a bit, actually, from what I've watched on him. But yeah, he's really, really good at the point of attack. He'll go up and get the ball, and he's definitely gonna win a lot of those battles for you. And I don't think the speed is a huge concern. I think he plays pretty quick in pads. I don't know, I know his 40 time wasn't great, but he's a guy that I think is just a good football player, and when he's on the field, he's going to produce.
Yeah, and to that, I'll say three things on Treadwell that I think are his key features that help separate him from other players. Number one, he's one of the best run blocking wide receivers that you'll see coming out of college. I know you don't get fantasy points for that, but anything to help you get on the field more often, you really can't score any points from the sideline, so it helps there. Two, similarly to the way he attacks defenders when he run blocks, he also attacks them similarly when he runs his routes, and I think that's one of the great ways that he uses his physicality, that he's always physically attacking the defender and put him on his heels and then making him react after that. And then third, he's as good as breaking tackles after the catch as any receiver as you'll find in this draft. And while he might not possess the kind of getaway speed that you'll find in a guy like Fuller or Coleman, he's a guy that's definitely going to be elusive after the catch and being able to bust through a couple arm tackles.
Yeah, for sure. The next guy we have on the list here is maybe athletically the freakiest guy from the skill position in this draft, and that's Derrick Henry. For a guy that big to be able to run as fast as he does, even though a 4.54 isn't that great of a time when you look at how big and fast, big and heavy he is, in terms of his size-adjusted speed score, it's off the charts, and his production is really second to none of any running back in this class. I do think that he can't go to any scheme as Elliott can and succeed. I think he's really going to need a team that really runs the ball up the gut a lot, does a lot of zone blocking. If he went to the Cowboys, he honestly could contend for the number 2 pick in most drafts.
Yeah, like 2,000 yards.
Yeah.
Like day one.
Yep. But what do you guys think about Derrick Henry?
So I'll jump up on that. I know you're huge on Derrick Henry. I'm a little bit more measured in that he needs to go to the right place because he's an absolute train once he gets going. The only thing is I see him get caught a little bit behind the line of scrimmage before he builds up momentum. And he doesn't have that lateral agility that you look for. I think he had one of the worst three cone drills that you'll see at every running back. But when you're talking about a guy that's 6'3", 245 pounds, whatever, just like an absolute monster, and you talk about the explosiveness too. I think he had 10-foot some inch broad jump, something like a 40-inch vertical, something crazy like that. The lower leg explosion on the guy is out of this world, and he possesses one outstanding trait that I always look for in a running back. Like, you need to be able to have like one defining characteristic that I'm like, all right, that's your thing, that's your signature thing. Like Eddie Lacy was the spin move. Derrick Henry has a nasty stiff arm.
Yeah,
he has one of the more punishing stiff arms that you'll see out of a running back come out. And really, I think his floor, to be honest, is Brandon Jacobs. And I'm curious to see what more it's going to be. I know some people say Eddie George, but Eddie George had a little bit more wiggle. So I think he can be a Brandon Jacobs plus at the next level. And Mike, what do you think? Plenko.
You guys hit on most of it because you both know pretty much everything. I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying. He's talented. He's explosive. I think in the right situation, I think that is important for him. Like he's got to be running out of an I formation or given some room to pick up some steam. But I think he's got good vision. I think he finds the holes. I think he can hit the holes. And yeah, if he goes to Dallas, I think that could be a really, really scary thing. But say that doesn't happen, I still think I think he has the tools to become a successful running back in the NFL. I think definitely will be better than Brandon Jacobs.
Yeah, but I can see where he's coming from, though. They have a very similar body type and play style, but I do think he's
huge.
far superior athlete and prospect to Brandon Jacobs. Next guy we have up here is Josh Doxson. A few comments from me on him. He's a little older than you'd like to see. I think he's 23 and a half already. But to me, if you're looking for a guy who's got the highest ceiling in the draft, it's probably Josh Doxson. In terms of his physical profile, he profiles as a number one receiver. He's gone out and been a number one receiver, as all these guys who we've discussed already have. But he's got the leaping ability, he's got the speed, he's got the production. He does have some concerns about his ability to go over the middle and play physical, but I think just from an outside receiver prototype, he's the best this draft has in terms of the body dimensions, the physical attributes, and the production at a high level that you're looking for.
Yeah, Josh Doxson is a guy that I love and a guy that I keep going back and forth between him and Treadwell at that number 2 pick. So just because I puffed up Treadwell before doesn't mean that I don't love Doxson, because I do. You really hit on most of it with Doxson. He is as good of a jump ball specialist as you'll find, as good as a contested catch receiver as you'll find. The only concerns I can think of is that, as you alluded to before, his age, his slender body type, but also he does a lot of work strictly outside in space. Doesn't really mix it up too much across the middle of the field. And the worst thing on Josh Doxson, in my opinion, is that he goes down on contact like every time. He really doesn't have the ability to break tackles after the catch, but one thing that he does have is he has more explosion than a guy like Treadwell, so he kind of puts himself in less positions to have to break tackles because he has a little bit more getaway pop to him. But just a classy guy. I mean, I think yesterday he just granted this like random kid's birthday party. He showed up to it because he was his favorite player, and then they took pictures and put it on social media. And then he had this whole great story with his mom and stuff like that. Like he's really close to his mom. And yeah, I mean, personally, I think that as far as player comps, I think he can be a poor man's AJ Green, probably a Marvin Jones plus. But I could definitely see him, like, if he was the first wide receiver in this draft to 1,400 yards, that really wouldn't shock me at all. I think he's got pretty much everything you look for. And Planko, what are your thoughts? I keep forgetting.
All right, 30 seconds later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this guy a lot. I think he's probably the most complete receiver coming out of this class. I really, really like watching him play. I think he's got it all. Maybe I'm partial to TCU players, not sure, but I really like what he does in college, and I think he can really produce at a high level in the NFL, as you guys stated. You know, he's got the explosion over Treadwell, but I think they're both physical and can go up and get the ball. And yeah, they're kind of like 1A and 1B in the receiver department this year for me. And it would be a coin flip. I don't envy you, Nick, but I'd be happy with whoever I got there.
Yeah, I'm actually going to flip a coin, so we'll see how that goes. Just kidding.
Two-face style. I like it. So,
both sides of the coin are Treadwell.
Oh,
Tricky, tricky, tricky. All right, the last guy we got on here is Corey Coleman, the receiver out of Baylor. I think the common thread with every prospect in this draft, other than Elliott, is that nobody's 100% clean. And the same thing can be said about Corey Coleman. He's produced at a higher level in terms of actual statistics than pretty much anybody in this draft. I think he had something like 20, 22 touchdowns this past year for Baylor. He is a little undersized, but he makes up for it in his. He plays very physical for his size, and he also has insane agility. Like there's clips of him just stopping on a dime, juking out one defender, juking out the other, and running 50 yards for a touchdown. I think he really, if he was 6'1", he'd probably be the number one pick in this draft. But instead, I think he's 5'10", 5'11". Mike, what do you think about Corey Coleman? What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, like you said, he's a little bit undersized, but he makes up for it with speed and quickness. He definitely doesn't lack the ability to get separation. Obviously, he's good with the ball in his hands. He could be, like a gadget guy. You can line him up in multiple spots, maybe even like Percy Harvin, but not horrible. And I kind of think that he could be a little bit could depend on where he lands a little bit. I think I think he's got to go to a team with a good quarterback and a good offensive system where he can find a nice role for himself. I don't think he's gonna be your ex receiver, and he's got to be a compliment to somebody, in my opinion. But that's not a knock on him. I just think he would be best suited to complement a guy that's a prototypical number one receiver.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. I think that Corey Coleman's the kind of guy that you look at to be a compliment, but when it comes to fantasy, I think he can be the highest producing wide receiver in his offense. But I think he just, as you said, he needs that prototypical chain mover on the other side. Really, Coleman, he is as rocked up as an athlete as you'll find. He is very tightly packed. Pound for pound, you're not going to find a more physically freakish player in this draft. And the one thing that I think I enjoy watching him more than I would expect is he attacks the ball in the air very similar to the way that Steve Smith would. So they're very aggressive. They both have that ball hawking, my ball mentality. Corey Coleman drops too many passes, though. I mean, it's really one of the knocks on him that you really can't deny. And then playing in that Baylor spread, he's really only run 3 routes. So they're going to have to coach him up on some of the finer nuances of playing NFL wide receiver. He's going to have to shore up some of those hands issues. But we talked about before about ceiling and Josh Doxson maybe having the high ceiling in this draft. I think maybe Corey Coleman might have the high ceiling as well. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. I could really see him somewhere like Houston playing alongside of Nuke Hopkins. But yeah, I mean he's a guy that if you have nothing to do on a Tuesday night and maybe you got 15 minutes to kill, put on some Corey Coleman highlights and then touch yourself for a little bit because it's gonna be a fun night.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you guys have said. He's really good. He'd be a really good Robin, not really a Batman though. The one thing that really kind of concerned me about him is he kind of did fall off the face of the earth when he faced tougher competition this year. He scored something like 20 touchdowns in his first 7 games. Then he didn't have another touchdown the rest of the year, and that's when they faced the meat of the schedule. They lost 3 of their last 4 regular season games, and he didn't have a touchdown in any of them. But yeah, like you said, if he ends up in Houston, if he ends up in Cincinnati, I honestly think he could be the number 1 producing receiver there in 2 years. But We'll see. So we've covered some of the top prospects in the upcoming rookie draft. Now I think we should transition over to talking a little bit about Planko's squad. He might have had the most shakeup without moving any guys this offseason, if that makes sense. His players have kind of all seemed to have had fortuitous bounces in the offseason. Starting off with Lamar Miller landing in Houston, might be the biggest offensive skill position player uh, landing spot in the entire offseason. One of the main knocks on Lamar Miller's fantasy value was his misuse by the Miami Dolphins offense, but I doubt that's going to be an issue anymore. Mike, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, so obviously I love the landing spot for Lamar Miller. I really like him as a football player. That's why I went and traded for him a couple seasons ago. And yeah, Miami just criminally underused him. It's weird too because you look at the games that he got the fewest carries, and he tended to always have the highest yards per carry in those games, and they would just mysteriously stop giving him the ball. It was very frustrating, and he still put up good numbers, so I'm pretty excited to see him actually get a full workload. I think he's the complete package. He can catch the ball. He runs well, obviously. And, some people have some concerns about his durability, but I'm confident that he'll be able to stay healthy and produce big numbers in Houston, especially with the threat of DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, he's a monster, so that'll relieve some pressure off him.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, Lamar Miller is a guy I've liked for a while. I remember when I first was scouting the 2012 class, which is what he came out at. He was my number 3 running back, and then everyone has their draft boards, they're like their own personal one, and then the NFL draft happens, and then you see how teams view guys, and that kind of you start to shuffle guys up and down your list. So he's a guy that fell very far down my list once he got drafted in the 4th round, but a guy I've always kind of kept an eye on, see how he would do if I can come back to reclaim him. So I think he went to about as good of a situation as he can go to. One thing that I really kind of solidified as a personal philosophy this offseason is the concept of draft pedigree and contract. And I think that, I know that Brabant and I have talked about this before, in that the closer you were to the early part of your career when you're drafted, you look for a guy that has a high draft pedigree, because that's going to be a guy that a team is going to throw everything behind. They're going to give him every opportunity to succeed. And the further you get away from that, the less that matters, and the more it matters of how much money have they allocated to this guy. So I think that seeing Lamar Miller land a big deal like he did shows you the kind of usage he's going to get, shows you the job security that he's going to have, which is something that is pretty volatile for the running back field. I think that Lamar Miller is in a great position, and I think he should be happy with the landing spot.
I agree. Just 2 quick points on Miller. He went to Killian High School in Miami, Florida. Then he went to the University of Miami. Then got drafted by the Dolphins. So he's pretty much never left home. That could be one potential thing to look for when he's in Houston. He's only 24 years old. I know he had some trouble getting into college. I think he has a learning disability of some sort, or he's just not super smart. I'm being serious, because when he was being recruited, that was an issue. Another thing with him is that there was a stat from the 2014 season where he was being most underused by Philbin, and his yards per carry on his first 11 carries was something crazy like 6.9 yards per carry, and then every carry after the 11th carry was something like 2.5 yards per carry. So maybe it was the scheme, maybe it was that they were so out of ball games by the time that they got to the second half when he was getting most of those carries that it just was kind of futile. But 2 things to definitely keep an eye on going forward. Not saying that he's not set up for success, because I really liked where he landed. Just 2 minor things about Lamar Miller that I want to mention. The next thing is a guy near and dear to Philadelphia fans' hearts, or not really. It's DeMarco Murray getting traded to the Tennessee Titans for a bump up in the 4th round. Mike, you gotta love anything that results in DeMarco getting a change of scenery, because that was about as bad as a year as you could expect for a guy who, from redraft standpoint, was a top 5 pick. What do you think about him in Tennessee?
Yeah, like you said, anything is better than Philly last year. You can blame it on a lot of things. Some people say he wasn't a scheme fit, or some people will just say flat out he was bad, or he was a product of Dallas's offensive line. I believe probably a little bit of all of that. I think he definitely benefited from the line in Dallas, but watching his monster year, he also routinely just looked like the best running back in football for that year. But I think he just tanked in Philly. I think he needs a new start. I think Tennessee is a pretty good landing spot. I'm not going to predict 2,000 yards, but I think to tie him to a young quarterback in an offense that's trying to get a run-first mentality to help develop their young quarterback, and I think Murray will help them out, and I think he could produce some solid numbers this year again.
Yeah, I would say on DeMarco Murray, I mean, the I guess biggest concern on him, I mean, I know he didn't play that well when he was on the field, but you really wanted him to go somewhere where he was going to be the workhorse. And I don't see any question that he's going to get his share of carries. Probably going to push for 300 touches this year. I generally like having running backs tied to young mobile quarterbacks. I kind of fall into that line of thinking. He's also one of the better pass-catching running backs in the league. So I think they're going to use him in the short passing game. And yeah, I'm interested to see what's going to happen. I know Tennessee had a better run-blocking offensive line than the Eagles had last year. Eagles struggled in their interior offensive line, so maybe that'll help them a little bit too. So yeah, I mean, right now I'm on cautiously optimistic. We'll wait and see mode with DeMarco, but there's no way it's going to be as bad as last year.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what this exotic Smash Mouth they keep talking about down in Tennessee is going to look like. But hopefully it's better than regular Smash Mouth.
That's just a buzzword.
All right, the next guy we got on this list is a guy who got a new contract not only in real life but in the elite, and also a guy who won me a lot of money in DFS towards the end of the year. Zach Ertz got a new deal from the Eagles. I think he's top 5 paid tight end in the league now. Nick, why don't you start off with what you think of Zach Ertz getting a new deal?
Love Zach Ertz. I tried to get him from Planko late in the season, like right when we opened back up for the trade deadline, because I thought he was a guy that was going to pop at any moment, and then he kind of popped before I could give him an offer that was good enough to pull the trigger. But yeah, love Zach Ertz. I think he is about as good of a player if you're looking at the tight end position, and I generally like anything that crosses that bridge between our league and reality and kind of closes that gap a little bit. So I really like the fact that he got a 5-year deal in real life and he got a 5-year deal in our elite league. So it's kind of like they're one and the same. But yeah, I mean, I think it's great. And as I said before, love when money comes into my players. Love when they get these guaranteed contracts and they're going to be used and not just kind of fall off the face of the earth. So you've got a guy that you're going to have high confidence in for the next 5 years, which is great. And your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, wait, I just totally forgot what the hell I was talking about. Oh yeah, Zach Ertz. Yeah, I love Zach Ertz. I think the contract extension is good for him, good for my team, definitely. I was glad to see him come on at the end of the year last year and start dominating the snap count and really putting up some numbers. Got all the talent. Might have gotten a little bit too much money, and I know he's kind of the guy everyone's been saying, this is the year, this is the year, this is the year for the last handful of years. But seriously, this is the year.
I think I agree. I think he's probably going to be the number 2 receiver in that offense this year, if I had to guess. So I guess it couldn't all be sunshine and rainbows for the Jitney squad. You got a young guy in Brashad Perriman that you drafted last year in the first round, who is still not running after a PCL tear, which has got to be concerning. But Mike, what do you think about Brashad Perriman's outlook this year?
Yeah, I was high on him coming out, and I think for his skill set, he sort of landed in the perfect situation, and that just made me like him even more. The injury is definitely disheartening because it's something that I think I read doesn't normally take this long to heal, and guys are usually back quicker. I'm not sure how true that is, and I know everybody's different, but it's definitely concerning. And then with the addition of Mike Wallace, it's a little concerning, but I still think he's got a high ceiling. Flacco's there. He throws a mean deep ball, so I think if he can get healthy, he'll still have a good career ahead of him. But that's the main thing is he's got to get on the field because he hasn't played a snap yet. So.
Yep.
Yeah, Brashad Perriman is a guy that I've kind of had a bunch of concerns on even before the injury. I know when I was looking at him before the combine last year, Steve and I were talking, and we were saying that we kind of like this guy, but he looks like he plays through mud, and we kind of have this concern over his speed. And then the combine happened, and then suddenly all those speed issues kind of just went away because he busted like a 4.2 something 40-yard dash, like insane.
Yeah, he was crazy fast.
And then, at that point, you kind of look back and then you try to figure out exactly what it is that you were looking at before. And then he had a bunch of drop issues too, if I remember correctly. So I kind of had a bunch of concerns, and I was really interested to see what happened to him. And now that he's he still is not running yet, so I really don't know. I'm not terribly bullish on him. His career could go in any direction, and I would not be the least bit surprised. He can come back and be, a top 15 wide receiver this year and be a great story, or he can kind of fizzle out into the abyss. But for my opinion, both scenarios are equally probable.
Yeah, I think he's probably got probably 5% athleticism for an NFL receiver. He's just anytime you get injured early, I have the same concerns about Kevin White. Seemingly shouldn't be that big of an injury. They're still kind of not back to 100%. Kevin White with the shin splints or the broken shin or something similar along those lines. Another thing about Perriman, which probably isn't rooted in truth, but sometimes you see in Major League Baseball, he just looks like a guy who's 5 years older than he actually is. If you've ever seen that shot of him, he looks like he's 28 already.
Yeah, it's very funny.
But he probably isn't. But just want to bring that up. Another young guy you got on your team who at one point was the consensus #1 pick in Dynasty in terms of Devy leagues, but has sort of fallen back to earth real hard, right onto his hammies. Marquise Lee, he's probably the number 4 at best, I'm sorry, in that passing offense at the moment. Nick, you and I were super high on Marquise Lee at one point. Do you think he has any opportunity for actually salvaging his career in Jacksonville, or do you think a change of scenery is needed for that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to mention Marquise Lee for this reason alone. I think he's one of those guys that's like a post-hype sleeper because he disappointed so much early in his career. I mean, granted, he does have his faults. I think he gets hurt way too often. It happened late in college. It's happened early in the pros. I mean, we were talking before, like you said, where him and Sammy Watkins were kind of neck and neck for the top dynasty guys, and that really fell a long way. Also, I don't think he attacks the ball in the air as well as he should. It doesn't seem like he catches the ball naturally with his hands. Kind of does this basket catch in his high shoulder pads, which bothers me a little bit. But that being said, the one thing that we had this big question about in the Jacksonville offense is, can they support 2 wide receivers? And I think last year you saw they can. Allen Robinson absolutely tore it up. And you got Allen Hurns played extremely well and also got 1,000 yards. So what I see now is this burgeoning powerhouse offense that have 2 guys ahead of him that could potentially get hurt on any given play, and then a guy like Marquise Lee with his pedigree and his skill set can come in and play for either of them. and I think would be immediately fantasy relevant if that happens. So I think I could see something happen where he steps in for an injured player, proves that he can do it a little bit, and then kind of like what you said, a change of scenery. There's no way they're going to keep all three wide receivers. Teams just aren't going to invest that kind of capital in one position. But I think he can get showcased well with an injury, and then leverage that to a better scenario elsewhere.
What do you think, Mike?
I unfortunately don't have as positive of an outlook on Marquise Lee. I mean, I do think he's got some talent. He's got some draft pedigree, and what you thought he was going to be. And now there's two guys that came in and have outproduced him by a long shot, and then plus you still got Julius Thomas, plus Yeldon can catch passes, and now they have a power running back in Chris Ivory, and I think it's going to be difficult for him to get in that lineup anywhere unless, like Nick said, there was a bad injury, in which case I think he could come in and produce, but I think it'll take a change of scenery for him to get any significant playing time going forward, and whether that be a few years down the road, I just kind of am in wait-and-see mode with him. I got him as part of a deal, kind of as a throw-in, so it's not like a guy I was super high on to begin with, but I'm just kind of holding on to him for now and hoping that his talent, he makes something of it. I'm waiting.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think also Jacksonville is probably the number one team in terms of regression I'm expecting this year. They had so many big fourth quarters this year, and with how much money they're paying Chris Ivory and how much they're going to improve their defense this offseason with guys they've already signed and what they're going to probably do in the draft and getting Dante Fowler back. Yep. I think they're going to be in a lot closer games where they're actually going to probably be within one score, where they're not just going to be tossing up 40, 50-yard passes left and right. Not saying that I don't think either Allen Robinson or Allen Hurns are talented. It's just I just don't see them both eclipsing 1,000 yards, and I think both had 10 touchdowns. No, did they both have 10 touchdowns?
I'm not sure.
All right, it was close to it.
I'm going to try and jump in for a second, even though this will be real late. But I personally think that what we saw from Allen Robinson last year will be his best year in the NFL statistically.
Yeah, I mean, he had a huge season. I could see that just based on how good of a season he did have, what his stats were.
I'm trying to Google it up real quick so that we got it. And
yeah, he had 80 catches, 1,400 yards on the nose, and 14 touchdowns.
Yeah, I think you're going to see...
that's some pretty high numbers.
Yeah.
You're probably going to see more catches, less yards, less touchdowns. He's probably going to settle somewhere around like 90 catches a year for 1,200 yards, and then like maybe 8 touchdowns, something like that. That's going to be like an average season for him.
Yeah, which is still, you'll take that all day as your wide receiver one. But yeah, I kind of agree with you, Mike. Yep.
Very good point.
So the last little nugget we got here about your team is Torrey Smith. Now, he signed a big deal going to San Francisco. If they get a legit quarterback, I think he's a pretty good sleeper for this year. But, I mean, the quarterback market has largely settled. So unless they get a quarterback in the drafts, or if they somehow trade Cap and sign Ryan Fitzpatrick or something crazy like that. Nick, what do you think about Torrey Smith's outlook this year?
I think that Torrey Smith could wind up benefiting similarly to like Mike Wallace right now, where Mike Wallace really struggled with he struggled with Ryan Tannehill, and he struggled with Teddy Bridgewater. Because these are guys that could not throw the ball deep, and that was really his one trick. But now that he's got Joe Flacco, I really think that Mike Wallace is going to have a really nice year. And maybe Torrey Smith could have the same thing. I mean, he's a vertical threat wide receiver. It would be pretty interesting if they got a guy like Cardell Jones in like the second or third round. I fully expect San Francisco to go quarterback early. And maybe it winds up being a guy like Paxton Lynch. He might be the best quarterback that's there in the first round. I think if Torrey Smith can get attached to a big arm quarterback, he can regain that 1,100-yard season type stuff on the 65 catches, that kind of like big play production. Because he's actually a wide receiver that I like a lot. I think he's a good player. He just needs to be in the right situation, and quarterback changes. It really can't be any worse than it was last year for him. So it can only get better.
What do you think, Plango?
Yeah, I agree. I think if they get a better quarterback that's not Colin Kaepernick or Blaine Gabbert or whoever the hell else they have, I think he can produce some numbers, especially in Chip Kelly's offense. They're going to be running a lot of plays. Just based on volume alone, he should get more opportunities. I've always liked Torrey Smith as a player. He is what he is. He's a deep threat. He's a one-trick pony. But, it hasn't stopped him in the past from producing numbers, and I don't think there's any reason that he can't go back to producing that way.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would say about Torrey Smith is that I don't think he's as one-dimensional as Mike Wallace. I think he's got a little bit more polish to his all-around game, but yeah, he definitely does rely on the vertical threat, like we were saying.
Yep, 100% agree. So I think that's the end of the show today, guys. I think we got a lot covered. I want to thank both Planko and Nick for coming on. It's been another successful show. Do you guys have anything you want to say to the listeners as we sign off?
Yeah, I just got a shiny new microphone, and I've been ecstatic to use it. So thank you guys for letting me use this new toy.
Looks familiar.
Yeah, I purchased it off of Mike Strong recommendation, so and I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to my solid internet connection for not having any delay, and the microphone that I don't have.
Yeah, it's funny. About halfway through the podcast, you kind of sound like you go retarded a little bit because the words come out like super slow, and you're just thinking about your words.
Yeah, it'll be like every third word. You'll be like, yeah, sometimes I do this thing.
Like, people that haven't met you are going to think you talk like that in real life, and I love it, and I hope that continues for a long time.
Maybe people will start hitting me up thinking they can rip me off because I'm retarded then.
You just sounded like the most retarded.
I love it. All right,
Good.
Great stuff, guys.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
All right, catch y'all later.
See y'all later, motherfuckers.